The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered not just from the crystal chandeliers but from the sheer concentration of wealth and power. For Preston Davenport, this was his natural habitat. He scanned the room, a king surveying his court, his arm possessively around his new wife, Brittany. But then he saw her. A woman in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like a galaxy, holding the attention of the city's most formidable titans. There was something hauntingly familiar in her posture, in the curve of her neck. He dismissed it. It was impossible. The woman he knew was a ghost of the past, a faded photograph. He had made sure of that. The Metropolitan Future Foundation Gala was the undisputed pinnacle of New York City's philanthropic calendar. It was a brutal arena disguised in silk and diamonds, where fortunes were pledged, alliances were forged, and reputations were cemented or shattered over canapes and champagne. Preston Davenport, CEO of Davenport Industries, a legacy manufacturing giant, felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. At 42, he was the epitome of success: sharp suit by Tom Ford, a Patek Philippe on his wrist, and a statuesque blonde Brittany draped on his arm. "Darling, isn't that Senator Rawlings?" Brittany whispered, her voice a breathy instrument of social calculation. "We simply must say hello. His wife chairs the committee for the Hamptons Classic." In a moment, Preston murmured, his eyes fixed across the room. His gaze was snagged by a woman standing near the sweeping marble staircase. She was the center of a gravity well, pulling in the room's heaviest hitters. Not with loud laughter or dramatic gestures, but with an aura of serene, untouchable confidence. Her dress was a masterpiece of dark blue silk sprinkled with what looked like genuine sapphires, clinging to a figure that was both elegant and strong. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was swept up in a deceptively simple chignon, revealing a graceful neck and a single staggering diamond earring. He watched as Lawrence Schmidt, the notoriously curmudgeonly head of a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, actually laughed at something she said. Then Rhys Corbin, the tech world's most enigmatic and reclusive billionaire, leaned in, his expression one of rapt attention. Corbin rarely appeared at these events, and when he did, he was a fleeting shadow. Tonight he was an anchor, and this woman was his port. "Who is that?" Preston asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Brittany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted lips tightening into a sneer. "I have no idea. Probably some new money tech founder. The dress is a bit much, don't you think?" Trying too hard. But it wasn't the dress that bothered Preston. It was something else. A phantom limb of a memory, an ache of familiarity he couldn't place. The way she tilted her head when listening, the small, almost imperceptible smile that touched her lips before she spoke. It was like hearing a forgotten melody from a dream. He pushed the feeling down. It was absurd. The women in his world, the women who belonged in this room, were catalogued and known. This woman was an anomaly. His ex-wife Adeline flickered through his mind for a brief, unpleasant moment. He pictured her as he last saw her tear-streaked face in a worn-out cardigan, standing in the beige living room of the suburban house he was leaving behind. Plain, soft, unambitious Adeline. Her world had been small, confined to her little garden, her books, and for a time, him. She could never in a million lifetimes become the creature holding court across the ballroom. The transformation was simply too vast, the chasm between that woman and this one too wide to be crossed. He had left her with a modest settlement, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to launch herself into this stratosphere. "I'm going to get a drink," Preston said, disentangling himself from Brittany. He wasn't going to the bar. He was going on a reconnaissance mission. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding at associates, exchanging empty pleasantries. As he got closer, he could hear snippets of her voice. It was low and clear, with a warm timbre that commanded attention without demanding it. He was only a few feet away now, shielded by a large floral arrangement. He could see her face more clearly. High cheekbones he didn't remember being so defined, eyes a shade of green that seemed deeper and more intelligent than the ones he recalled. She wore her confidence not like a costume but like a second skin. Rhys Corbin said something that made her laugh, a genuine throaty sound that sent another jolt of unwelcome recognition through Preston. He had to know who she was. This was his world, and she was an intruder, an unsolved variable. He stepped out from behind the flowers, ready to interject to introduce himself and solve the puzzle. He caught her eye. For a split second, the polite social mask on her face dropped. In her green eyes, he saw a flicker of something ancient and cold, a history he had written and then tried to erase. And in that instant, the world tilted on its axis. The ghost had a name. It was Adeline. The recognition didn't dawn. It crashed into him. It was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs, making the champagne flute in his hand feel impossibly heavy. The face was Adeline's, but it was as if it had been resculpted by a master artist, chipping away the soft uncertainty and revealing the formidable structure beneath. The shy, hesitant woman he had divorced was gone. In her place stood this creature of poise and power, looking at him not with the pain he remembered, but with an unnerving, placid indifference. It was the look one gives a stranger on a subway platform. His mind, usually so sharp and linear, fractured into a kaleidoscope of memories. He saw her 5 years younger in their old kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, a hopeful smile on her face as she explained some complex concept about solar energy conversion she'd read in a scientific journal. He remembered waving it away. "That's nice, honey," he'd said, his attention already back on the stock market report. "But let's leave the world saving to the professionals, shall we?" He remembered the arguments. They had started as trickles and ended as floods. "Preston, I was thinking of taking a course at MIT online. They have a new program on renewable energy systems." "Adeline, what for?" "We don't need the money. Your job is here, making sure my life runs smoothly so I can do what I do. It's a partnership, but it's not my passion. This is something I think I could be good at. Being my wife isn't enough of a passion for you." He'd been so adept at twisting her ambition into a criticism of him, making her feel guilty for wanting more than the gilded cage he had built for her. The final fight was the ugliest. He had just secured a major hostile takeover, a career-defining moment. He came home buzzing with adrenaline to find her poring over schematics and equations at the dining room table. "For God's sake, Adeline, can't you put this hobby away for one night?" he had boomed. "I just closed the biggest deal of my life and you're doodling about windmills." "It's not a hobby, Preston," she had said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's a new type of photovoltaic cell. The efficiency is theoretically 30% higher than anything on the market." He had laughed, a cruel booming laugh that echoed in the cavernous room. "Theoretically, you, a literature major who hasn't worked a day since we got married, are going to revolutionize the solar industry from our dining room table. Get real. This is why we're not moving forward. I'm out there a shark in a world of sharks, and I come home to a dreamer playing with science projects. I need an asset on my arm, not a liability with a fantasy." The word liability had hung in the air between them, shimmering with poison. That was the night he told her he wanted a divorce. He had already met Brittany, a model-turned-influencer who understood the transactional nature of his world. She was an asset. Now, standing in the opulent ballroom, the memory felt like acid in his throat. The hobby wasn't just a hobby anymore. The woman he had called a liability was standing next to Rhys Corbin, a man who didn't invest in hobbies. He invested in empires. Rhys Corbin put a light hand on the small of Adeline's back, a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a spear of pure, unadulterated jealousy through Preston. He had never touched her with such easy respect. His touch had been one of ownership. Brittany chose that moment to reappear at his side, her presence suddenly grating. "What are you staring at? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," he said, his voice a low growl. "That's Adeline." Brittany's eyes widened, her perfectly made-up face a mask of disbelief. She scanned Adeline from head to toe, her gaze dripping with a venomous mix of shock and envy. "That's your mousy little ex-wife." "No way. What happened to her? Did she win the lottery?" "I don't think so," Preston said, his mind racing. The settlement had been generous by a normal person's standards, but it was pocket change in this room. It wasn't enough to buy that dress, those diamonds, or 5 minutes of Rhys Corbin's time. This was self-made. The terrifying realization began to dawn: the dining room table doodles, the late night studying, the passion he had mocked. It had all been real. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had failed to see her at all. He watched as Adeline excused herself from Corbin and began to walk towards the terrace. It was an instinct, primal and possessive, that made him move. He had to talk to her. He had to understand. He muttered a quick excuse to Brittany and followed his heart, pounding a strange, unfamiliar rhythm in his chest. He was no longer the king in his court. He was a man chasing a ghost, desperate to know how she had learned to fly. For Adeline, the divorce was not a clean break. It was an amputation. Preston had been her entire world for a decade. She had molded herself into the woman she thought he wanted: the supportive wife, the gracious hostess, the silent partner. His final words, "a liability with a fantasy," had been the surgical steel that severed the last vestiges of that identity. She moved out of the sprawling suburban mansion and into a small rented bungalow in a town she didn't know. The first few months were a gray blur of grief and inertia. The silence in the small house was deafening, a constant reminder of the life and the man she had lost. The settlement from Preston felt like blood money, a payment for her wasted years. She refused to touch it, letting it sit in a bank account while she lived off her meager savings from before her marriage. One rainy afternoon, unpacking a box of old college textbooks, she found them, her notebooks. They were filled with the scribbles and calculations Preston had ridiculed. Diagrams of crystalline structures, theories on light absorption, frantic equations about energy storage. Looking at them didn't bring the sting of his mockery. Instead, a tiny forgotten spark flickered to life inside her. This was hers. This was the one part of her life he hadn't been able to touch, to shape, or to diminish. That night she cleared off the cheap particle board desk in the spare bedroom and set up the old laptop she had kept. She didn't sleep. Fueled by coffee and a desperate need to reclaim a piece of herself, she dived back into her research. The literature degree Preston had belittled had taught her one invaluable skill: how to research, how to synthesize vast amounts of information, and how to find the narrative thread in complex data. She started with the MIT Open Courseware program he had forbidden her from taking. Every night while the world slept, she was in a virtual lecture hall absorbing information on materials, science, quantum physics, and electrical engineering. She converted the garage into a makeshift lab using the settlement money for the first time. She bought a second-hand spectrometer, soldering irons, and silicon wafers. Her neighbors thought she was a reclusive eccentric. Her breakthrough came not in a flash of genius, but through grueling, monotonous failure. She was trying to develop a more efficient perovskite solar cell, a technology that was promising but notoriously unstable. Her innovation was a unique layering technique using a new polymer substrate she had theorized could protect the delicate perovskite crystals from degradation. She failed 287 times. Each failure was a small, soul-crushing defeat. There were nights she slumped over her workbench, smelling of ozone and despair, convinced Preston had been right. She was just a dreamer, a liability playing with a science project. But every morning the spark would flicker again. It was a defiant what if. What if the 288th time was the one on a cold Tuesday in November, nearly 2 years after the divorce it was? Test number 288. She ran the current through the cell, her heart pounding. The multimeter's reading was stable, and it was high, impossibly high. She checked it again and then a third time. It wasn't just a 30% improvement. Under controlled conditions, her prototype was showing a 42% increase in efficiency, and more importantly, it was stable, showing minimal degradation after 100 hours of continuous stress testing. She knew she had something revolutionary, but an idea without capital is just an idea. The next year was a different kind of hell. She patented her technology under the name Luminera. She put together a business plan and started pitching to venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road. The rejection was brutal and swift. They saw a woman with no business background, no PhD, and no track record. They saw a literature major trying to play in the world of hard science. One VC, a man named Gerald Pike from a top-tier firm, was particularly dismissive. "Sweetheart," he'd said, patting her hand condescendingly after she finished her presentation. "The science is cute, but you're not the person to lead this. Find a nice CEO, a man with some gray in his hair, and maybe we can talk about giving you a small piece of your own company." She walked out of that meeting feeling a cold, hard rage that burned away the last remnants of her grief over Preston. The condescension was the same, just in a different suit. She was done being underestimated. Her last-ditch effort was a cold email. She'd spent a week crafting a 2-paragraph message to Rhys Corbin. He was a legend in the tech world, an engineering prodigy who had built his first software company in his Stanford dorm room and was now the head of the sprawling Corbin global conglomerate. He was known for two things: his reclusive nature and his uncanny ability to spot disruptive technologies years before anyone else. She didn't expect a reply. One came 3 hours later. "Your abstract is compelling. The polymer substrate is an elegant solution. My team has been wrestling with perovskite degradation for years. Send me your full data set. Secure server link attached. RC." A week later, a black car was waiting outside her bungalow. It flew her to Rhys Corbin's private R&D facility in the Nevada desert. She walked in expecting a team of intimidating executives. Instead, she found Rhys Corbin in jeans and a plain black t-shirt, standing alone in a lab that made hers look like a child's chemistry set. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I ran your simulation data," he said, pointing to a massive screen filled with molecular models. "Then my team spent the last 48 hours replicating your prototype. It works. In fact, it works better than your data suggested." He turned to face her, his eyes a startlingly intense gray, boring into hers. "I've read your patent. It's a fortress. I've read your background. It's unexpected. The VCs on Sand Hill are fools." They saw a literature major. "I see a polymath who taught herself quantum mechanics in her garage." They saw a risk. "I see the future of renewable energy." He made her an offer that made her head spin. Not to buy her out, but to partner with her. He would provide the capital, the manufacturing infrastructure, the legal team, and the global distribution network. She would remain CEO of Luminera with full control over research and development. "I don't invest in companies, Adeline," he told her, his voice devoid of the condescension she had grown so used to. "I invest in founders, and you are one of the most formidable founders I've ever met." In the 18 months that followed, Adeline blossomed. Working alongside Rhys and his team of world-class engineers, she was no longer a hobbyist. She was a visionary. Her confidence, which had been systematically dismantled by Preston, was rebuilt on a foundation of proven competence and mutual respect. Rhys challenged her, debated with her, but always he listened to her. He saw her mind first, and it was a revelation. Her physical transformation was a byproduct of her internal one. The long hours in the lab were replaced by a more balanced schedule. She hired a personal trainer, not for vanity, but for the stamina she needed as a CEO. She bought a new wardrobe not to attract a man, but to dress for the boardroom she now commanded. The woman who emerged was not an invention. She was an excavation, the real Adeline who had been buried for a decade. When the invitation for the Metropolitan Future Foundation Gala arrived, it was Rhys who suggested they go. "It's time," he had said simply. "Luminera is moving out of stealth mode. The world should meet its CEO." She had felt a flicker of fear, the ghost of the woman she used to be. The thought of seeing Preston was a cold knot in her stomach. But then she looked at the woman in the mirror. The woman who had failed 287 times and gotten up on the 288th. That woman wasn't afraid of anything. The air on the terrace was cooler, a welcome reprieve from the overheated ballroom. Adeline leaned against the stone balustrade, the city lights of New York sprawling before her like a carpet of fallen stars. She had allowed herself exactly 90 seconds to process the shock of seeing Preston. The sight of him had been like a phantom pain, a dull ache from a limb long since amputated. But the pain faded quickly, replaced by a calm, crystalline clarity. He was just a man. A chapter in a book she had finished reading long ago. "Adeline." His voice was just behind her. She didn't jump. She took a slow, deliberate breath, gathered herself, and turned to face him. He looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes and mouth deeper etched by a different kind of pressure than the one she now knew. The arrogant confidence was still there, but it was brittle like a thin layer of ice over deep water. "Preston," she said, her voice even. She did not smile. I almost didn't recognize you," he stammered, his eyes raking over her, a confused mix of awe and disbelief. "You look incredible." "Thank you." The words were polite but held no warmth. She was a fortress and her drawbridge was up. "What are you doing here?" he asked, then immediately rephrased, realizing how it sounded. "I mean, what have you been doing? The dress Rhys Corbin? I don't understand." A small, humorless smile touched Adeline's lips. "You wouldn't," she said, the words quiet but sharp. "You never did." The barb hit its mark. A flicker of anger crossed his face. "What's that supposed to mean? I gave you a very comfortable life, a very generous settlement." "You think this is about money?" Adeline asked, a genuine note of surprise in her voice. "Preston, the settlement you gave me paid for the initial equipment in my garage. I haven't touched the rest of it. This," she said, gesturing vaguely at the gala at the city at herself, "this wasn't bought. It was built." He shook his head, trying to process the information. "Your garage? What are you talking about? That little science project. The little science project you mocked on our dining room table." She confirmed, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word was laced with steel. "The doodling about windmills. It's called Luminera Technologies now. And Rhys Corbin isn't my date. He's my primary investor and business partner." The name Luminera meant nothing to him, but the context was a body blow. The woman he had called a liability was now the CEO of a company backed by one of the most powerful men in the world. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the Adeline in his memory with the woman standing before him. "So Corbin bankrolled you," he said, snatching at a narrative that made sense to him, one where she was still dependent on a man. "He saw a pretty face, and—" Adeline's laugh cut him off. It wasn't the warm, genuine laugh he'd heard earlier, but a cold, sharp sound. "Oh, Preston, you still don't get it. You see a dress and a pretty face. Rhys saw a patent for a photovoltaic cell with 42% efficiency and near zero degradation. You see a woman. He sees an asset. You were right about one thing all those years ago. You do need an asset. You just had no idea how to value one." Just then the terrace doors swished open and Brittany glided out, her expression a mask of forced sweetness. "There you are, darling. I was getting worried." She slid her arm through Preston's, her eyes flicking to Adeline with open hostility. "Well, hello again. Preston told me who you are. It's quite the transformation. You must tell me the name of your surgeon." Adeline looked at Brittany, this woman who was a younger, shinier version of the wife she herself had once tried to be. She felt nothing, not jealousy, not anger, not even pity. "It's called ambition, Brittany," Adeline replied smoothly. "You can't buy it, and no surgeon can give it to you. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned to leave, but Preston grabbed her arm. His touch was no longer possessive. It was desperate. "Adeline, wait. We need to talk." Adeline looked down at his hand on her arm, her expression turning to ice. "Take your hand off me, Preston." He let go as if he'd been burned. "There is nothing for us to talk about," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You made your choice 5 years ago. You chose a life that was predictable and easy. You chose a partner who would reflect your glory instead of creating her own. I, on the other hand, chose the dining room table. It turns out I chose wisely. Enjoy your evening." She turned and walked back into the ballroom without a single backward glance, leaving Preston and Brittany standing in a stunned, crackling silence on the terrace, the cool night air feeling suddenly unbearably cold. Back inside, the ballroom's atmosphere had shifted. The idle chatter had subsided and guests were taking their seats. A podium was now illuminated at the front of the stage. The main event was about to begin, the presentation of the Innovator of the Year Award, a prestigious honor bestowed by the Metropolitan Future Foundation to an individual whose work promised to reshape the world. Adeline rejoined Rhys, who gave her a questioning look. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly," she said, a newfound sense of finality settling over her. The ghost had been faced and had dissipated into nothing more than a bad memory. Preston and Brittany returned to their table near the front, but the mood between them was toxic. "I cannot believe she spoke to me like that," Brittany hissed, her voice low. "And what was that about photovoltaic cells? So boring." Preston wasn't listening. He was watching Adeline and Rhys take their seats at the head table alongside senators, philanthropists, and titans of industry. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, was beginning to pool in his stomach. He had built his empire, Davenport Industries, on traditional manufacturing. They produced turbines, engines, and generators, powerful, reliable, fossil fuel-guzzling machines. In recent years, profits had been shrinking. The world was changing, moving towards clean energy, and his board was pressuring him to innovate, to acquire a tech company to pivot them into the future. He'd been resisting calling it a bubble, a fad. The lights dimmed further. The chairman of the foundation stepped up to the podium and, after a few brief remarks, introduced the evening's keynote speaker and award presenter. "A man who needs no introduction," the chairman boomed. "A true visionary who has consistently stayed 10 steps ahead of the future. Please welcome Mr. Rhys Corbin." A polite yet thunderous applause filled the room. Preston felt his blood run cold. Rhys walked to the podium, exuding an easy confidence that Preston had always tried and failed to emulate. "Thank you." Rhys began, his voice calm and commanding, filling the cavernous space. "We gather tonight to celebrate the future. But the future is not some distant, abstract concept. It is built piece by individuals with the courage to challenge the present. It is forged in garages and late-night study sessions. It is born from a refusal to accept the status quo." Preston felt a knot tighten in his gut. Every word seemed aimed directly at him. "For decades," Rhys continued, "we have been told that there is a necessary trade-off between progress and sustainability, that the power that fuels our world must by necessity poison it. We at Corbin Global have invested billions in trying to solve this equation. And for years we, like everyone else, have hit a wall. The problem has always been efficiency and stability." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Until now." His gaze swept the room and landed with deliberate and unmistakable emphasis on Adeline. "The Metropolitan Future Foundation's Innovator of the Year Award is given to someone whose work represents a paradigm shift. This year we honor a founder who, with no formal background in the field, but with a brilliant, relentless, and truly innovative mind, solved the puzzle that has eluded the world's top scientists for a decade." A screen behind him lit up with a simple, elegant logo, Luminera. Preston stopped breathing. The name he had dismissed an hour ago was now projected 10 feet high, a beacon of his own monumental ignorance. "Luminera Technologies has developed a new class of perovskite solar cell," Rhys explained, his voice ringing with genuine excitement. "It is a technology so efficient, so stable, and so cheap to produce that it doesn't just improve on existing solar power. It makes nearly every other form of energy generation obsolete." A murmur rippled through the audience of investors, CEOs, and politicians. This wasn't just an award speech. It was a market-altering announcement. "This technology will power our cities, our vehicles, and our homes. It will bring cheap, clean energy to the developing world. It is, without exaggeration, the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era." Rhys smiled. The board was unanimous. "It is my profound honor to present this year's Innovator of the Year Award to the founder and CEO of Luminera Technologies, Ms. Adeline Davenport." He said her married name, the name Preston had given her. It was a deliberate surgical twist of the knife. He wanted everyone in the room, everyone who knew him, to make the connection. A spotlight hit their table. The room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that felt like a physical assault to Preston. He watched frozen in a state of surreal horror as Adeline stood. She looked regal, composed, magnificent. She shook Rhys's hand and walked to the podium, moving with a grace he had never seen in her. She accepted the heavy crystal award, her expression one of quiet, steely triumph. "Thank you, Rhys," she began, her voice steady and clear. "And thank you to the foundation. There are many people who told me this was impossible, that my ideas were a fantasy, a hobby. I suppose in a way I should thank them too." Her eyes for a brief, chilling moment met Preston's across the silent room. Their disbelief was the fuel I needed. "Luminera is more than a company to me," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the captivated audience. "It is a promise. A promise that a better, cleaner future is not just a dream. As of tonight, it is a reality. We are finalizing a multi-billion-dollar partnership with Corbin Global to begin mass production immediately. We project our first utility-scale solar farms will be online within 18 months, producing energy at a cost per watt that will render coal and natural gas plants and the technologies that power them economically unviable." That was the kill shot. Davenport Industries, his family's legacy. Their primary products were turbines and generators for coal and natural gas plants. She hadn't just announced her success. She had, in front of the most influential people in the world, signed his company's death warrant. The applause that followed was deafening. Preston didn't hear it. He was drowning in the silent, screaming realization of what he had done. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had discarded the very person who held the key to his own future, and in doing so had handed his executioner the axe. The rest of the evening passed in a torturous, slow-motion blur for Preston. As soon as Adeline left the stage, she was engulfed. A swarm of photographers descended, their flashes popping like miniature explosions. Senators who had barely given Preston the time of day were now shaking her hand with vigor. Competitors he had crushed on his way up were now looking at him with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. He was a ghost at his own funeral. "Preston, we have to go." Brittany hissed, her grip on his arm painfully tight. Her face, usually a carefully composed mask of glamour, was pinched with panic. She wasn't stupid. She understood the implications of Adeline's announcement. The Davenport name, which had been her golden ticket into this world, was now tainted with the stench of obsolescence. "Go where?" Preston asked, his voice hollow. He couldn't take his eyes off the scene across the room. He watched as Adeline handled the crush of attention with an unnerving calm, Rhys Corbin always near her side, a protective, powerful presence. "Anywhere but here," Brittany snapped. "People are staring at us. They're whispering, 'You look like a fool, Preston. How could you let this happen? How could you not know your own ex-wife was—'" She trailed off, unable to even articulate the scale of his failure. He finally looked at her. Truly looked at her, and saw her for what she was, a beautiful hollow vessel, an asset whose value had just plummeted to zero. She wasn't his partner in this crisis. She was just another liability. They made their escape through a side door, avoiding the main exit where the press was undoubtedly waiting. The ride back to their Park Avenue penthouse was silent and suffocating. Brittany was furiously typing on her phone, likely consulting with her publicist or texting her gossiping friends. Preston stared out the window at the city lights, the same lights Adeline's technology was poised to power. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his CFO, Patrick. "Markets closed, but our pre-market futures just fell off a cliff. Down 30% based on the news out of the gala. The Corbin Luminera announcement is everywhere. Calls are coming in from the board. They're demanding an emergency meeting." "What the hell is going on?" Preston felt a wave of nausea. 30%. Billions of dollars of value erased in minutes because of a woman he had called a dreamer. He typed back a single word. "Handle it." When they arrived at the apartment, the cold minimalist space felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Brittany threw her clutch onto a white marble table. "So what's the plan?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "How are you going to fix this? My brand is tied to yours, Preston. I can't be associated with a failure." The word failure snapped him out of his stupor. He turned on her, his face a mask of cold fury. "Your brand? You think this is about your Instagram followers?" he snarled. "This is about a 100-year-old company, my family's legacy going down in flames because I was a blind, arrogant fool. And you know what? You were part of the problem. You with your talk of assets and appearances. You were the reflection I wanted. A perfect, polished, empty reflection." Brittany recoiled, her face pale with shock and anger. "How dare you blame me for this? You're the one who divorced her. You're the one who thought she was a nobody." "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What? Get out," he repeated, pointing toward the door. "Pack your things and go. The asset has been devalued. The partnership is dissolved." For the first time, Brittany looked genuinely scared. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. After a moment of stunned silence, she turned on her heel and stormed towards the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Left alone in the cavernous living room, Preston walked to the bar and poured himself a large glass of scotch. He downed it in one go, the burn in his throat doing nothing to quell the fire in his gut. He sank onto a ludicrously expensive designer sofa and buried his face in his hands. The full scope of his miscalculation was crushing. It wasn't just that he had underestimated Adeline. He had actively suppressed her. He had been the barrier to her success. He had mocked the very thing that could have been his salvation. If he had encouraged her, funded her, championed her, Davenport Industries could have been the one partnering with her. They would have been untouchable, the leaders of the new energy revolution. Instead, he was the dinosaur watching the meteor streak across the sky. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. He scrolled through his contacts until he found her name still saved under Adeline. He stared at it for a long moment before typing a message. "Adeline, I am so sorry for everything. I was wrong. We need to talk." He hit send, his heart pounding. He waited. 1 minute, 5, 10. The message remained undelivered, not read. She wasn't even looking at her phone. She was out there somewhere in the glittering city, celebrating her triumph, stepping into a future she had built not just without him, but in spite of him. He was a footnote in her story, the villain in her origin. And for the first time in his life, Preston Davenport, the king of his own small, crumbling world, felt truly and utterly alone. The first light of dawn crept over the edge of Queens, a tentative blush of rose and gold that bled across the violet sky. It touched the spire of the Empire State Building first, then spilled down the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan, setting the city ablaze with the quiet fire of a new day. From the panoramic windows of the penthouse suite at the Mandarin Oriental, the spectacle was breathtaking. The city, so ferocious and loud from the streets, looked serene from this height, a sleeping giant awaiting its cue. Adeline stood before the glass, a mug of black coffee cradled in her hands, its warmth seeping into her palms. She had not slept, not for a single minute. The adrenaline from the gala had been a potent current humming through her veins, too vibrant for the stillness of sleep. But as the night had given way to morning, the frantic energy had subsided, replaced by something deeper and more profound. It was the feeling of a marathon runner in the quiet moments after crossing the finish line, a pleasant ache in the muscles, a profound sense of exhaustion, and beneath it all a vast, unshakable satisfaction. She caught her reflection in the window, a silhouette against the rising sun. The borrowed diamonds and couture gown were gone, replaced by a simple silk robe. Yet she had never felt more powerful. The woman staring back at her was not defined by the clothes she wore or the man she was with. Her form was defined by the relentless will that had carried her through 287 failures, through the condescending sneers of investors, and through the haunting echoes of a past meant to keep her small. Behind her, the low, decisive murmur of Rhys Corbin's voice was the only sound in the suite. He was already on a conference call with his team in Berlin, his back to her as he paced by the desk. He spoke in fluid German, the words precise and commanding. Even without understanding the language, she could hear the purpose in his tone. He was setting the world in motion for her, for Luminera. He concluded the call, switched his phone to his other hand, and began another, this time in English. "Jonathan? Yes, it's me. I need our primary manufacturing hub in Austin retooled for polymer substrate application. Full priority. I don't care what the timeline was yesterday. The timeline is now. Send me the revised projections by noon New York time." He paused, listening, then his eyes found hers in the reflection on the glass. He offered a small, tired smile and a respectful nod. It was a gesture between equals, a silent acknowledgement of the mountain they had just begun to move together. Their partnership, forged in a Nevada laboratory and sealed in a New York ballroom, was not a whirlwind romance. It was a meeting of minds, a powerful alliance built on the bedrock of mutual respect and a shared audacious vision. He had never once made her feel like a project or a protege. From the moment he read her research, he had treated her as a peer, a fellow architect of the future. Her own phone, left on a side table since the previous night, lay dark and silent. She had intentionally ignored it, granting herself a moratorium from the deluge of messages she knew would be waiting. But now, in the calm of the morning, a flicker of curiosity moved her. She picked it up. The screen flared to life, a cascade of notifications flooding the display. Texts from long-lost college friends, congratulatory emails from scientists she had only ever read about, and a dozen alerts from news outlets. And then one notification stood apart from the rest. A single text message from a number she had not seen in years, but which was still seared into her memory. From Preston. Her thumb hovered over the message, a moment of infinitesimal hesitation. This was the final ghost, the last echo from a life that no longer felt like her own. She pressed it. The words appeared stark and pathetic against the bright screen. "Adeline, I am so sorry. For everything. I was wrong. We need to talk." She read the message once, then a second time. 5 years ago, those words would have been a balm and a poison, a validation she craved so desperately it would have broken her all over again. 3 years ago, they would have brought a surge of bitter, triumphant tears. But now they were just words. They were the desperate plea of a stranger, a man she barely recognized. The titan of industry she had married, the man whose approval she had chased, would never have sent a message so weak, so transparently self-serving. He had been reduced, and the sight of his diminishment brought her no pleasure, only a distant clinical sense of closure. He was sorry he was wrong because his wrongness was about to cost him everything. It had nothing to do with her. She thought of the woman in the worn-out cardigan, her spirit meticulously dismantled piece by piece. She felt a wave of compassion for that version of herself, for the pain she had been forced to endure. But that woman was gone, and her tears had long since dried, having served their purpose by watering the roots of this new, unyielding strength. With a quiet, deliberate finality, Adeline held her thumb down on Preston's message. The option appeared, "Block this caller." She pressed it without a second's thought. Then she deleted the message thread, wiping away the last digital remnant of their shared history. It was not an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of sanitation, like wiping a slate clean before beginning a masterwork. Across the city, in the cold, cavernous penthouse on Park Avenue, the same morning sun felt entirely different. It was not a promise of a new beginning, but a harsh, interrogating glare. It streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the sterile white furniture, the obscene voids of empty space, and the fine layer of dust already settling on Brittany's memory. Preston sat motionless on the sofa where he had collapsed hours earlier. The untouched glass of scotch on the table beside him had left a faint ring on the polished wood. His phone, lying face up, was a relentless engine of his demise. It buzzed and lit up every few minutes with the names of the people who held his fate in their hands. Patrick, his CFO, his father calling from retirement in Palm Beach, the lead members of his board. Each call he ignored was another nail in his corporate coffin. He finally pushed himself up, his body stiff and aching, and walked on unsteady legs into his home office. He ignored the blinking light on his desktop terminal, a frantic signal of the stock market's impending judgment. Instead, he pulled open a bottom drawer and lifted out a heavy leather-bound photo album. It was from the first few years of their marriage, before his ambition had curdled into a kind of casual cruelty. He flipped past the glossy photos of them at galas, not unlike last night's, their smiles wide and hollow. He stopped at a candid snapshot he'd taken one summer afternoon in the backyard of their first home. It was Adeline. She was on her knees in the dirt of her vegetable garden, a project he had indulgently called charming. Her face was smudged with soil, her hair was a messy bun, and she was laughing, holding up a lopsided, gloriously imperfect tomato as if it were a precious jewel. She wasn't looking at the camera, but at the tomato, at the simple, tangible thing she had nurtured and grown herself. She looked utterly, incandescently happy. A chasm of regret opened up inside him, so vast and deep it threatened to swallow him whole. He had seen that joy, that passion for creation, and he had not valued it. He had seen her intellect as a hobby, her curiosity as a distraction. He had tried to prune her, to shape her into an accessory that would complement his life, and in doing so, he had almost snuffed out the very light that made her extraordinary. The full, horrifying weight of his mistake crashed down on him. It was a multi-layered catastrophe of his own making. The business miscalculation was apocalyptic. He had actively mocked the technology that could have saved his legacy. The personal failure was even greater. He had possessed a treasure, and in his ignorance had thrown it in the trash. But the real punishment, the true soul-crushing consequence, was just now becoming clear. His desperate late-night text was not for her. It had been for him a selfish, pathetic attempt to seek some kind of absolution to make himself feel better. He saw that now. And its deletion, the silent, unread finality of it, was her true answer. The opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference. He had built his life on the bedrock of his own importance, and he was now completely and utterly irrelevant to the one person whose opinion had in the end mattered most. He was the ghost now, haunting the empty rooms of a life he had dismantled while she was out in the sun building a new world. Back at the Mandarin Oriental, Rhys had finished his calls. He walked over to where Adeline stood, coming to a stop beside her. "Berlin is ready for us," he said quietly. "They want to schedule the initial integration meeting for next week." Adeline finally turned from the window, her back to the past, her face toward her partner. A genuine smile, bright and full of purpose, lit up her features. "Tell them to book it," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'll be there." She took a final sip of her coffee, looking not just at the skyline, but at the intricate grid of a world she was about to remake. The view from up here wasn't just extraordinary, it was the future, and it was hers. Adeline's story isn't just about revenge, it's a powerful testament to the fire that can be forged in the ashes of betrayal. It's a reminder that our greatest strength is often buried beneath the expectations and limitations others place upon us. Preston didn't just lose a wife, he lost a future he was too blind to see. Adeline, on the other hand, didn't just find success. She rediscovered herself, and in doing so changed the world. Her journey teaches us that true value is never about who you're standing next to, but about the power and potential you hold within. The best success isn't just living well, it's building a world your detractors could never have even imagined. What did you think of Adeline's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you proved someone wrong in a big way? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were inspired by this story, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and powerful storytelling. Your support helps us create more content just like this.